9700K, which is roughly 10% more expensive at the time of filming. While both chips sport 8 cores, the 3700X has twice the number of threads at its disposal, as the 9700K lacks hyperthreading support. However, it does ship with higher clock speeds out of the box. AMD scores the lower TDP here, although it's well known by now that Intel's advertised TDP is based on base clock alone and should be taken with a grain of salt anyway. The Intel part lacks any stock cooler, while the 3700X includes a Wraith Prism RGB unit, which is a nice value add for its launch price of $329 compared to the 9700K at $365. If you have about $500 to spend on a CPU, you might be considering the Ryzen 9 3900X or the Core i9 9900K, which is currently 2% cheaper. The 3900X sports 12 cores and 24 threads, crushing the Core i9's 8 and 16 configuration, albeit with slower base and boost clock frequencies. Understandably, we see a higher TDP on the 3900X than its smaller Ryzen 7 brethren, which again is hard to compare to Intel's marketing spec. Like the 3700X, the Ryzen 9 also ships with a Wraith Prism RGB cooler and launches at $499 versus $489 for the 9900K. Here's a quick look at the test results. For AMD, we're using an MSI X570 Ace motherboard and 16 gigs of DDR4 3600 memory, overclocked with little effort to 3733. For my brief amount of tinkering, memory compatibility with Ryzen 3000 is already chalking up to be 100 times better and more stable than with previous generations. For CPU cooler, we're using the Asus ROG Ryujin 360mm AIO using the default fan curve, and we'll be booting off of a 2TB Aorus PCIe Gen 4 NVMe SSD. An exciting first, the X570 platform marks the arrival of PCIe Gen 4 support. Our GPU is NVIDIA's GeForce RTX 2080 Founders Edition running stock. While using an RTX 2080 Ti to show more disparity in gaming performance between CPUs, I opted for a more realistic approach in a world where few gamers have over $1,000 to spend on a video card. There's also bound to be no shortage of Ryzen 3000 reviews using RTX 2080 Ti's if you're looking for them. Intel CPUs were tested on the Gigabyte Aorus Z390 Extreme with 16 gigs of DDR4 at 3400, bearing in mind that Intel CPUs don't benefit from high memory frequency in most applications like Ryzen chips do. The system uses the same cooler, GPU, and power supply as the AMD testbed, but boots off a WD Black SN750 PCIe Gen 3 SSD. Windows 10 Pro on build 1903 and GeForce WickleDriver 430.86 were running on both systems. With that out of the way, let's talk benchmarks. A couple polls confirmed that the vast majority of you would use the new high-end Ryzen chips for gaming and content creation, like streaming and editing, and that you'd be mostly gaming at 1920 by 1080 and 2560 by 1440. So those are the workloads and resolutions I've tested in today. None of the CPUs were manually overclocked, however, multi-core enhancement was enabled on both systems' motherboards. Multi-core enhancement, or MCE, applies a factory overclock of sorts that can potentially make the chips operate out of spec. The MCE setting is enabled by default on both of these boards, so the results you're about to see most closely reflect the performance of a bone-stock plug-and-play experience with the given hardware. Ambient temperature was 22 degrees Celsius or 72 Fahrenheit. So right out of the gate, we see the Ryzen family topping the charts in Firestrike Extreme, even if it is by a small margin. The 3900X brings home the highest overall score, followed by the 3700X, with the Intel parts trailing behind. The best graphics score, however, goes to the 9700K. The 9900K practically ties the 3900X's graphics score and its own Bloodline's main score, adding to the somewhat inconclusiveness of this test in particular. Once again, the 3900X takes the top overall score in Time Spy, this time followed by the 9900K, then the 3700X, with the 9700K in dead last by quite a bit. The 3900X also leads with the graphics score, while the remaining SKUs duke it out and land just a few points apart. Our first full title tested is Ashes of the Singularity at 1080p, and here we see Intel pull ahead by a whopping 13% in average frame rates, and even more so with 1% lows. As expected, the gaps close a bit at 1440p as we become more GPU bound, but Intel retains its lead, especially the 9900K with a 7% uplift over its competitors. Battlefield 5 at 1080p shows similar results, but the difference isn't quite as extreme here, and AMD seems to be holding fast. Ryzen 3000's promised IPC improvement appears to be at work here, keeping the path clear for the monstrous RTX 2080. Echoing the results at 1440p, the Intel chips take a modest lead, approaching the highly sought-after 144 FPS mark. Doom was the only game I did not test at 1080p, due to both systems maxing out its 200 frame rate cap at said resolution. But at 1440p, we see all four contenders neck and neck in average frame rates, although something kind of funky is afoot with our 1% lows. The 9900K was technically the best and worst performing chip in this regard, but sometimes benchmarks are just funny that way. Since I feel bad for taking away that 1080p slide, I threw in Doom at 4K to make things right. This is the only 4K gaming test today though, so don't get used to it. Again, very comparable results here, which is a given for this resolution, with our GPU handling much of the legwork. BFA 5 is a very CPU-intensive game, so it's great for this kind of testing. The 9900K gets a 9% lead over the 3900X in average frame rates, while the 9700K enjoys a hefty 15% bump over the 3700X. GTA 5 does a great job at leveraging multiple threads, but having 16 of them is probably overkill, and ultimately it's Intel's wicked IPC that has this round in the bag. The 9900K nets 6% more frames than its rival at 1440p, while the 9700K continues thrashing the 3700X, this time by 10%. We see a brief role reversal in the Resident Evil 2 remake, with the 3900X delivering 3% more frames on average, and the 3700X having some revenge on the Core i7 by about 5%. Oddly enough, Intel steals back the crown at 1440p, as if only to let AMD taste victory for a single fleeting moment. Now, the Shadow of the Tomb Raider built-in benchmark kept reporting a minimum frame rate of 0 FPS for all CPUs, so this isn't the best slide by any means. I might say it's rather average. Still, we can see that 9900K and 9700K are 6% and 9% faster than their direct competitors, respectively. With high resolutions being the great FPS equalizer for CPUs, we see a stalemate begin to form at 1440p. At this point, we can switch gears to professional workloads. I tried my best to keep my workstation tests as realistic and practical as possible in order to give you an idea of how the hardware might perform in real-world situations. For my streaming benchmark, I ran GTA 5 on the streamer system at 1440p based on the poll results you guys gave earlier. The game was streamed out to Twitch at 1080p 60 frames per second with a 5000 kilobit per second bitrate as per the platform's recommendation for that resolution and frame rate. Lucky for all four of our contenders, OBS reported 0 dropped frames for all, and our hypothetical viewers on the receiving end enjoyed equally smooth playback of similar quality across the board. As you might expect, the results are more varied on the host side, with the Intel chips delivering 13% more frames on average to the streamer. Cinebench is an exciting test because it's the first time we get to see the 3900X spread its wings. This is what it was built for and what it does best. With a multi-threaded score that's 42% higher than the 9900K and 88% higher than the 9700K, the 3900X is a computing monstrosity, partly thanks to its higher thread count. The Ryzen 7 part is no slouch either. The 9900K barely beats the significantly cheaper 3700X by just 4%, and the 3700X crushes the 9700K by 27%. Single-threaded scores are grouped much closer together, with the 9900K leading by about 1.6% over its direct competitor, and the 9700K which sees a 2.5% bump over the 3700X. Handbrake is a great rendering benchmark because it leverages all threads typically at 100% utilization. Here the 3900X renders a 10-minute 4K clip 11% faster than the 9900K and 9% faster than the 9700K, which surprisingly bests its hyper-threaded ally. The 3700X takes about 8% longer to finish than the Ryzen 9 part, but renders up to 4% faster than both Intel CPUs. It's not a huge lead, but still impressive given its lower price. Our first encoding test in Premiere Pro Creative Cloud renders a 10-minute 4K timeline of footage that includes color correction effects and video transitions to help tax the system. This time the 9900K barely edges out the 3700X and renders much faster than the 9700K, but trails behind the 3900X and does the job nearly 7% faster. I also ran a second rendering test in Premiere just to see how things hold up with gameplay footage, overlaid with a shrunken piece of video where a streamer might be displayed. Twitch streamers often cut together highlight reels of streams for their YouTube channels, so this seems like a handy test to include. The 10-minute clip was rendered at 1080p 60 frames per second, which is pretty standard for this type of content. Here we see the same ranking play out as the last slide, although here the 3900X is just 2% faster than the 9900K, while being 11.6% faster than the 9700K. It's also about 7% faster than the 3700X, which is just 5.3% slower than the 9900K. When it comes to rendering, the 3900X is the definitive renderer, whereas the 9700K seems to be the weakest link in the bunch. The 9900K and 3700X seem to trade blows in this category, which is an accomplishment for the significantly cheaper Ryzen 7 part. Now, I made this next multicam test with serious editors in mind. The objective is to play back 3 4K clips simultaneously at various playback speeds and record the number of dropped frames after 1 to 3 minutes depending on the speed. I've worked on dozens of multicam projects in my day, and there's nothing worse than trying to scrub through several clips at once only to have to chug into a choppy mess. At 1x real-time speed, our 9700K is the only SKU that drops frames, 163 in fact, which causes the playback to stutter consistently. At 2x, all CPUs drop frames like they're hot. But the 9700K does so poorly, the playback is too fragmented to edit comfortably. While the 3900X drops the least amount of frames at 2x and higher, the 3700X and 9900K are so close behind that perceptible playback smoothness between these 3 CPUs is indistinguishable. Even 8x playback looks beautiful on each of these high-end processors, except the 9700K. It's worth pointing out that the 9900K and the 3700X are rubbing up against each other again. You should probably get a room with it. Now in my testing today, I did not find the task demanding enough to show the full benefits of X570's PCIe Gen 4 standard. But it is something editors should factor into their buying decision and do more research on if they plan on needing super fast NVMe storage for things like 8K editing and other extreme workflows. For the average prosumer making YouTube videos or low-budget productions, existing PCIe Gen 3 NVMe drives are still insanely fast. Now that we've covered all the data, which CPU should you buy? As usual, it boils down to your budget and what kind of workloads you plan on running. Let's first address gamers who aren't concerned with doing any other intensive tasks besides gaming. Looking back at Ryzen 7 2700 and 2700X gaming benchmarks, the new Ryzen series has roughly cut the performance gap between Intel in half. A significant jump over last gen that puts Ryzen 3000 hot on the heels of blue. Having said that, it's evident that Intel is still the gaming champ and still the choice for enthusiasts looking to max out their frame rates, especially users with extremely high-end video cards like the RTX 2080 Ti, as the higher IPC will help these GPUs reach their full potential. If this applies to you, and the only intensive task you're doing with your system is gaming, I would strongly recommend the 9700K over the 9900K, due to its significantly lower price, and the fact that there's virtually no difference in gaming performance between the two. Like the 9900K, the 3900X is a bad value if gaming is your only agenda, because it's more expensive and performs worse in games than the 9700K. Compared to the 3700X, the 9700K is up to 15% faster, possibly more in certain titles not tested here. But the 3700X is still a viable gaming-only chip if you're trying to stretch your budget, since it's a bit cheaper than the Core i7 and it includes a cooler. Combined, that saves you roughly $60 that you can pocket or put towards a faster graphics card, for example. It has to be said that, like all Ryzen 3000 SKUs, the 3700X also benefits from the scalable Zen 4 platform that's backward and forward compatible with existing and future Ryzen CPUs, as long as AMD continues making good on their promises. This simplifies and lessens the cost of upgrading processors down the line and is worth considering in your buying decision. The AM4 platform also supports PCIe Gen 4, although currently it's a feature that's less beneficial to gamers than it is to content creators, and therefore should not be given as much weight for an exclusive gaming machine. From a gamer's perspective, the 3700X delivers a better overall value than the 9700K, with its lower price, flexible platform, and bonus apps. On the same token, the 9700K offers the better gaming experience and will allow current and next-gen top-tier GPUs to deliver more frames to the screen. Moving on to users who plan to game and stream with their PCs. Our 1080p 60 FPS test proves that all the CPUs provided an equally smooth stream with 0 dropped frames. The deciding factor then comes down to gaming performance on the streamer side, which clearly favors our Intel SKUs. If you're like most streamers targeting 1080p 60 FPS, the 9700K is technically the strongest option right now, since it delivered higher frame rates than both Ryzen chips, and it's much cheaper than the 9900K and 3900X. That being said, it technically has the worst multi-threaded performance here, meaning it's probably less equipped to handle streaming for the long haul than any of these CPUs. It's difficult to say what the streaming landscape will look like 1 or 2 years from now and beyond. So while the 9700K's multi-threaded performance is adequate for most streamers today, it'll likely begin showing its age in the face of higher streaming demands before the 9900K and its competitors. As mentioned, the 9900K won't improve your frame rate much, but its higher thread count makes it a smarter choice for serious streamers than the 9700K. The 3900X one-ups the 9900K in multi-threaded performance, which should give it a longer lifespan as a streaming CPU, but falls behind in gaming. So you'll want to choose one of these chips based on which workload you prioritize. 9900K for gaming, 3900X for streaming. Like the 9700K, the 3700X is a viable budget option for streamers, but for different reasons. It trades in some gaming performance for higher multi-threaded performance, which might not be needed now, but it does make the part more future-ready for streaming. If you have less than $400 to spend on a streaming CPU, you'll have to decide if you want higher frame rates today or better streaming tomorrow. Now, if we add video editing and rendering to the picture for a fully fledged content creation workflow, the multi-threaded performance of the 3900X makes it the clear winner, with faster render times and fewer dropped frames than the 9900K. It also has support for PCIe Gen 4, should that be required, and the option to easily upgrade to the 16-core Ryzen 9 3950X down the line. However, the 3900X should last most users a very long time, as it's a beast of a chip and the best damn value of any dodeca-core CPU ever. The 3700X's editing prowess is comparable to the 9900K, but it's nearly $200 cheaper, and can also leverage PCIe Gen 4, making it a much better value for this use case. The 9700K should be avoided here due to its slower render times and inability to handle more intensive editing workflows. Finally, if you could care less about gaming and editing is your sole objective, only the Ryzen chips should be considered, as they perform better than their direct competitors for roughly the same price or cheaper. Of course, serious buyers should also consider high-end desktop platforms like Skylake X and Threadripper 2, but if those are too pricey or overkill for your needs, choosing between the 3700X and 3900X is a decision best left up to your wallet, as both parts offer great price to performance. So there you have it. At the end of the day, each of these processors fulfills different needs for different users. It'd be easy if we had one chip to rule them all, but we already kind of had that when Intel was on top and unchallenged by AMD for so many years before Ryzen came along. That wasn't fun. Ryzen 3000 improves upon the platform's existing pillars of strength, further leveling the playing field to a degree we haven't felt in a very long time. For now, it seems strong competition in the CPU market is here to stay. But let me know what you guys think of these Ryzen CPUs and which SKU from Team Red or Blue you'll be dropping into your system. Apart from that, guys, feel free to toss a like before you go, and feel free to consider becoming a member of the channel for $5 a month, where you'll get custom badges, emojis, and other pointless things that are just so fun for some reason. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more tech stuff on the way. Thanks again for watching, have a good one, and I'll see y'all in the next video.
Let's get this out of the way. Even the most ardent AMD fan knows that Intel is king when it comes to gaming, and AMD always has been and always will be nothing but a second choice for portable. And everyone, including myself, has only themselves to blame for getting wrapped up in the hype around the 3rd gen Ryzen launch and jumping on the bandwagon too early. Let's throw up some numbers here, shall we? So as you guys can see here, a simple die shrink was never going to, a simple die shrink was, hey, AMD is tied with Intel. Yeah, that's CSGO. That's known to favor Intel.
Yeah, well, I mean...
Are you sure you labeled this correctly? Yeah. Intel goes here, AMD goes here. This is gaming. This is... You sure that's right? Could it be that Intel is behind AMD for gaming? We are going to need to go a little bit deeper here, folks. Speaking of deeper, if you ever want to take a deeper look at what's going on with your network connection, Glasswire allows you to monitor your network activity and block badly behaving apps. Use offer code Linus to get 25% off at the link in the video description. Let's do the technical stuff first. At the core of this launch is Zen 2, AMD's aptly named next-generation Zen microarchitecture that incorporates a new chiplet layout consisting of multiple 7nm CPU dies and and a dedicated 12nm I/O die, all joined together by an Infinity Fabric interconnect that runs at double the bandwidth of the previous generation in order to reduce latency. AMD has also thrown in a more efficient branch predictor, much faster AVX, support for super fast frequency switching, a feature that improves both performance and efficiency, kind of like Intel's Speed Shift, and finally, Game Cache, one of the dumbest bits of branding that we've seen since Super graphics cards. As it turns out, Game Cache is just marketing speak for doubling the amount of level 3 cache on the CPU. The good news is that, stupid name aside, it does help feed Ryzen's hunger for extremely fast data access to the point where AMD claims that this optimization alone is worth double the benefit of going from DDR4 2666 all the way to 3600 on the previous generations. Improving matters even further, 3rd Gen Ryzen now natively supports DDR4 3200 and has been seen overclocking as high as 5100 MHz. To put that in perspective, 1st Gen Ryzen was so picky about memory that for a while you needed high-end Samsung B-die modules in order to hit 3200 MHz. By contrast, 3rd Gen Ryzen's new off-die memory controller design has AMD claiming a sweet spot of DDR4 3733. That's frankly astounding. So they managed all this by optimizing trace routing to the CPU and decoupling the memory frequency from the Infinity Fabric clock. That means that you're no longer overclocking the Infinity Fabric when you overclock your memory. Speaking of overclocking, AMD's updated Ryzen Master utility provides full timing control while booted to the OS and lets you import and export those settings, including settings that are generated by third-party Ryzen memory overclocking calculators. So, if you've got a similar setup to an exported profile from someone you know, then you can actually use those numbers as a jumping-off point, which is really cool. We're hoping to follow up with a full overclocking guide, but in a nutshell, it's pretty different, but in a good way. There's even more that AMD's done here too, but the TLDR is that this is far more than just a die shrink, and it all adds up to a pretty hefty performance improvement. And the crazy part is that's all before we even get to the new motherboards. Now, many 2nd generation and some 1st gen Ryzen boards should get support for 3rd gen chips. But for the best experience, AMD is of course recommending their new X570 chipset. With X570, supported devices, including the chipset itself and the link that it has to the CPU, are going to run at PCI Express Gen 4, which is capable of double the bandwidth of the previous generation. That means that high-performance devices like multi-gigabit network cards, USB 4 controllers, NVMe storage, and future graphics cards will be able to run their best on X570. Okay, that was a lot of new stuff to take in, so I'm just going to sum it up here. AMD now has much faster cores, and, making matters worse for Intel, their modular approach to chip design has enabled them to pack in more of them. Today, right now, AMD has a 12-core, 24-thread consumer CPU on store shelves, and it's priced to match the Core i9 9900K with a measly 8 cores and 16 threads. And what's even crazier is it's got 105-watt TDP, which Intel happens to measure at their base clock, and AMD measures at their boost. Of course, it's one thing to be told all of this, and quite another to see it. So here's the test setup that we're using today. We're going to be pitting the best that both teams have to offer against each other with the most current software and firmware patches on as equal footing as possible. It's worth mentioning up front that we did observe some interesting behavior when testing between DDR4 3200 and 3600 on both Intel and AMD here. We settled on 3600 for this review, but let us know if you'd like to see a follow-up on performance at different memory speeds. Now, let's finally get back to those gaming charts. Immediately we see that not everything is Ryzen friendly, but AMD has closed the gap considerably over 2nd gen, with even our much less expensive Ryzen 7 sample pulling off respectable numbers compared to Intel's flagship consumer Core i9 9900K. But mere numbers do not tell the whole story here. Take Battlefield 5, for example. This looks like a clear win for Intel. That is, until we fire up OBS in the background and start streaming our gameplay. Now AMD's on top.
Now you might think that that's simply because AMD has more cores and a more efficient interconnect, but look closely. We saw a lot of run-to-run variation in frame rate, seemingly at random. What this suggests to us is that the CPU isn't always using the most efficient group of cores to run the game. Assigning the game to only one of the dies made things a lot more stable and faster. So with some Windows scheduler or game optimization, we think AMD could have significantly more performance on their hands.
Speaking of more performance, productivity is Ryzen's traditional stomping ground, and stomping, I think, would be a generous way to describe Intel's treatment under AMD's heels here. At worst, AMD roughly matches Intel in per-thread performance, while also having more cores at the same price.
And at best, it's like watching that South Park episode where the kids' hockey team plays the Detroit Red Wings. Check out this Mozilla Firefox compile test. That is the Ryzen 7 3700X running over a minute and a half faster than Intel's flagship consumer Core i9 9900K.
Now, normally when we run through these graphs, we feel like we need to provide voiceover commentary about which kinds of workloads lean more towards which product, or if you're this kind of professional, maybe you should consider this. But today we kind of are just killing time while the graphs roll, because it's as simple as if you've got real work to do on your computer, you should buy a Ryzen 3rd Gen.
And the good news keeps rolling. AMD's thermal performance, which can finally be measured without applying a temperature offset calculation, is pretty decent. The new chips sit at cozy but manageable temperatures, which is especially relevant because AMD's Precision Boost, unlike Intel's Turbo Boost, does not have a duration limit. So, much like a GPU, Ryzen 3rd Gen will keep boosting for as long as it can within its thermal and power budgets. In other words, these things are designed to redline. Under a Prime 95 small FFT load, that translates to a sustained frequency not a whole lot higher than base clock, but that's okay, because under a more realistic scenario, like a long Blender render, Ryzen 3rd Gen CPUs manage to consistently stay a few hundred megahertz over base.
When we tried disabling the power limits and enabling the most aggressive options for Precision Boost Overdrive, things did heat up quickly, and I suspect that voltage tweaking is going to be the main way to get better overclocks on these higher-end Ryzen chips, with upgraded cooling, of course, required, leading us perfectly to one of the major downsides of the X570 platform: the active cooling, usually in the form of a small fan required to control the heat output of the motherboard chipset. It's a real bummer for me to see this cooling trend come back, because tiny, proprietary cooling fans tend to be one of the least reliable components in a PC, which means that if it fails, the best case is that you're jury-rigging a cooler to limp along, and the worst case is that your motherboard throttles your performance or cooks itself before you realize that anything is wrong. Unfortunately, this cooling is a necessary evil, apparently due to the additional power required by PCI Express Gen 4. The good news is that at least it does make a difference for storage throughput. Right now, we're looking at nearly 2 gigabytes per second worth, and we could expect more in the future. It's also worth noting here that even while we were hitting our Aorus SSD with 4 continuous looping file copies of about a gig of photos each, Crystal Disk Mark's sequential write numbers barely dipped below what you might consider reasonable for an entry-level NVMe SSD without any additional load on it. Not too shabby. But PCI Express Gen 4 seems to contribute to toasty operation on the other side of the link as well, and our SSD got really hot during benchmarking, despite its massive heatsink. I think we're going to have to start coming up with some really creative SSD cooling solutions, folks, because while you want the controller to be cool, the NAND itself, actually if it gets too cool, its reliability gets hurt. Anyway, that's a conversation for another time. For now that we've made our way through performance, it's time to talk value. And there's just no way to dance around this. Intel must adjust their prices.
The Ryzen 7 3700X mostly matches the Core i9 9900K blow for blow, but is priced lower than a Core i7 9700K, which lacks hyperthreading.
So it's a bad story now, and we haven't even looked at AMD's less expensive, overclocking capable chips. Remember, every Ryzen is unlocked, or AMD's upcoming 16-core Ryzen 3rd Gen.
Now, strictly speaking, if you're a gamer, Intel can technically still claim to be on top.
Goblin products
and the
are
Core
built
i7
to last.
9700K could still appeal to you if you're
stuff
all about
sells
that
itself.
raw frame rate. But Intel's margin of victory is very thin compared to what we're used to seeing, and we're only expecting the gap to shrink.
So if you do almost anything else on your computer, it gets pretty tough to justify. So then, guys, this is it. Take in the moment, because for the first time in over a decade, AMD is essentially on top of the consumer CPU race, and much like in the Athlon 64 days, Intel has no meaningful response on their roadmap, meaning that it is Intel who's going to have to slash their prices in order to stay competitive. And the craziest part of all of this is that with Team Blue still trying to ramp up 10 nanometer production, AMD may end up having a response for that by the time it rolls out. So the final word, and I really can't stress enough how important this is whether you like AMD or hate AMD, they're back in a big way, and you should be absolutely freaking stoked, because competition is always good for the consumer. Speaking of good, iFixit's Essential Electronics Toolkit is compact and goes anywhere you go and can be used to fix almost anything. It includes their most popular precision bits that are held in place with high-density foam so you can throw it around with any of the bits falling out, and it's got a lifetime warranty. Get yours today for just $24.99 at ifixit.com/Linus. We're going to have that linked below. So thanks for watching, guys. If you disliked this video, you can hit that button, but if you liked it, hit like, get subscribed, or I was thinking about saying, like, if this video made you blue, or if you're blue about this video, then maybe that's not for me. While you're down there, check out the link to where to buy the stuff we featured in the video description. Also down there is our merch store, which has cool shirts like the one I'm wearing, and our community forum, which you should totally join. And AMD will always be a second choice for poor people. Sorry. I'm going to try one more time. Whenever we put together a list of recommended parts for building your own PC, there's one complaint that always shows.
You dumb Canadian.
Yeah, that. You know, that was pretty mean, but the random stranger I've never met and never will has a point. Maybe it's just as viable, and maybe it's way cheaper to build a PC on eBay. Maybe within the same budget, you could build a much more kick-ass rig than you could by going through Newegg or Amazon. Maybe none of this is a maybe, because maybe we already did it. And maybe I'm gonna tell you guys all about it.
G-Skill's Trident Z Royal Series DDR4 RAM features a polished aluminum heat spreader in gold or silver and this gorgeous crystalline light bar that radiates RGB in every direction. Check it out at the link below. So we began our journey with a spec list for like a decent gaming PC on PC Part Picker that ended up at just over $1,000 for all new parts at retail prices. Now, we didn't choose this price point for any particular reason, other than that it's just kind of what we ended
arrange with you with a payment plan?
bestätigen, Hartmann.
Ja, Kommandant. Anton 1 an Oberkommando gehen jetzt in Position. Anton 1 geht jetzt in...
Legit. That's still charging. That spell isn't ready yet. It's still recharging. Let's interfere with the sons of Aragal. That's recharging. You too shall serve. Release your rage.
What is it? Embrace the shadow.
What is it? Dark days watch over you.
What do you require? Dark Lady, watch over you.
It's still recharging. Listening. Trust